I never really read fantasy that much. I mean, so like for people my age or around my age, it's like Harry Potter, of course, was one of the biggest books growing up and still is. And then Lord of the Rings, of course. I read The Hobbit, and then I've seen all the movies. I feel like so one of these days I'll read the Lord of the Rings books, but uh, I just feel like I know the movies so well. There would have to be another reason for me to want to read it, which maybe coming up now is the reason. But there's been two fantasy series that I've really looked at in the last month or so, and the first one is one of the most famous epic fantasy series as far as I can tell. The people talk about it the most, but it's called The Wheel of Time. And there is a Hulu series which I kind of started, and it didn't really. Well, I don't want to say it didn't look good. I hadn't read the books yet, and I think I just wasn't drawn to it just yet. But I started the books. The first Wheel of Time book is called Eye of the World, and everyone who I've seen talk about it on YouTube or whatever agrees that it is sort of just an expansion of the Lord of the Rings in a different universe where the notes are very similar and or the notes meaning like the points in the storyline. So there's like kind of a main character named Rand, and it starts with him like in his village, and they're kind of and he's got friends and other people. Like there's tons of characters in this book, so I might get kind of twisted up trying to talk about it without looking at the book, but basically it's like he is in a village and kind of naive, and then the village gets raided and by like these kind of supernatural creatures, so that's like the hooded horsemen in the Lord of the Rings. It's like the same thing there, and then they like it ultimately causes them to go on a quest with people wiser than them. But this Rand character is kind of suggested that he's sort of like the chosen one, which is a trope in fantasy. I'll talk about this in more detail later. The real reason I'm bringing it up is like in a comparison to this other book that I'm about to talk about very soon. But The Wheel of Time is the other thing that's interesting to me, and kind of why I started reading it, is the book series itself. I think is honestly 14 books long, and they're all huge books, like 700 pages or more. So that in itself, I'm like, when I look at book series that are 12 books and like 1,000,000 words combined, I'm like, what could possibly be going on in those books that it lasts for such a long story? So that was kind of what initially drew me to it, but then also the fandom is really deep. People love these books. And a lot of people think they're not good also. But one thing, and I don't know if it's just because it is a Lord of the Rings expansion so far, which I do think it gets more interesting. This book is good, and the prose is very like poetic and pretty, and it's very he's a very good writer. His name is Robert Jordan. Like he's a really great writer, and the comparison of Lord of the Rings isn't super bothersome because of his style and the world that he actually creates. But one thing, which I wonder if it's because it's a spin-off of, or a parallel universe of Lord of the Rings, like all the species, like the evil kind of army that's maybe equivalent to both orcs and Sauron's army and all that stuff in the Lord of the Rings. They have different names that are unique, and I actually don't know how to say a lot of the names. And then like the characters that have supernatural, like the storytellers and the other roles that are in this community have like their own names, and everything in this world kind of has its own name that was created by the writer. Which brings me to the next book that I've been looking at, which the series is called The Rift Wars, and the book that I'm looking at is the first one called Magician Apprentice. And this one is interesting. This one is only 4 books and they're not as long, but it's interesting to me because it actually accumulated from this writer and his friends. I think kind of it's based on the world they were creating in Dungeons and Dragons, and it's kind of, I need to look into it more because it's interesting. So this book was published in '82, and I think he started writing it in the '70s. Like back in the '70s, people used to actually publish kind of bootleg books of worlds for Dungeons and Dragons that you can buy and read and play. And I think they still kind of do that now with like there's other competitors to Dungeons and Dragons that are completely different that you can buy. But back then, I mean, you can go on Wikipedia and see some of the pamphlets. It would be pamphlets that they would publish, and it would be like the world that you can play Dungeons and Dragons in, and that it's like kind of an underground thing that was happening. It would be cool to actually look into those. I've only played Dungeons and Dragons twice, and truthfully, I don't really think I ever learned the rules. I wasn't very good at it because, as I don't know, I have a hard time like learning rules of games, honestly. But it was fun, and the culture itself is very interesting to me. So anyway, this Magician Apprentice is the first book of this world that this guy kind of made using Dungeons and Dragons. And so like opposite to this Wheel of Time series where everything has its own name, like the villains and the wisdoms and the storytellers and everything in this community have kind of different names. This Magician Apprentice book, it's like the villains are like trolls or they're goblins, and then there's like elves, and so I don't know. I think that it's interesting to think about because the Wheel of Time book can be kind of overwhelmingly dense. Getting into the world and getting into his writing style is so poetic and stuff, and all of his characters and everything. There's like a lot to learn, and I imagine the more you read and the more you study it, it gets easier and easier to read the books. But on the other end of it, this other one that's based on Dungeons and Dragons is like effortless to get into it because you don't need to learn what an elf is or what like a goblin is. You can already get the idea of it just from like kind of the already stapled versions of these characters. So like I said, you could probably read the Magician's Apprentice like way faster because it doesn't really take a lot of effort, and then also the prose of it is much more simple. It's sort of just scenes, and the world itself, there isn't as much layers to it. It's more just Dungeons and Dragons. But for my own purposes, just since I've been trying to study the genre of fantasy, I think as a newcomer to the genre, this Sorcerer's Apprentice is a good one because I can see everything more easily about the tropes and the chosen one and the armies and villains, and it's easier to digest. But I imagine if I were like already deep into the lore of fantasy and read Wheels of Time and all the other great series, this one maybe it wouldn't be enough to like immerse yourself in. But yeah, I don't know. I still think I'm glad that I'm reading it, and I kind of latched onto it right away, and I'm actually almost done with it. So anyway, just in regards to writing, even if you don't write fantasy, for me, I'm trying to like study how they kind of put together worlds, because it doesn't have to be like with elves and dragons and shit. It can also just be like how you develop a world in general, even if it's based on a real world. So that's kind of my hopes for like studying these.